In the autumn of 1807, Napoleon Bonaparte looked untouchable. Austria humbled, Prussia crushed, Russia now an ally. Only Britain still stood in his way, guarded by the Royal Navy. So Napoleon tried to strangle it instead, a vast economic war enforced at gunpoint across the continent. But on the fringes of his empire, in Portugal and Spain, that pressure would trigger something he never expected. Riots in palace courtyards, peasant uprisings blessed from the pulpit, and a brutal little war that would bleed France for years. In this episode, we'll follow Napoleon's first great mistake in Spain, from Bayonne and Madrid to Bailén and the snows of Galicia, and watch how an emperor at his peak walks straight into a quagmire. If you enjoy deep dive history told with clear maps and careful detail, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next campaign. French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte stood at the height of his power in Europe. He had humbled Austria, crushed Prussia, and sealed an alliance with Russia. Of the great powers, only Britain still defied him, protected from invasion by the guns of the Royal Navy. To break Britain without landing a single French soldier on its shores, Napoleon turned to economic warfare. He ordered every territory under French control, or allied to France, to cease all trade with Britain. The so-called Continental System, a vast blockade meant to strangle British commerce and force London to sue for peace. But neutral Portugal, bound to Britain by centuries of alliance and trade, refused to comply. So Napoleon sent an army under General Junot to occupy the country and drag it into line. The invasion was backed by France's ally, Spain. In public, Napoleon praised the partnership. In private, he held Spain's rulers in contempt. The Bourbon royal family was decadent and divided. King and crown prince despised each other, and real power lay in the hands of the king's favorite, Manuel Godoy, the queen's lover. To Napoleon, Spain was backward, militarily feeble, and badly governed. An inviting prize for a man who now expected Europe to bend to his will. He began to devise a plan to seize the country for himself. In the spring of 1808, under the pretext of protecting Spain from a British attack, French troops quietly took up strategic positions across the kingdom. For many Spaniards, the French presence was not a friendly shield, but the latest in a long series of national humiliations. Popular anger focused on Godoy, blamed for inviting the French in. At Aranjuez, south of Madrid, riots broke out. The royal favorite was dragged from hiding and narrowly escaped being lynched by the mob. Napoleon invited the Spanish royal family and Godoy to take refuge across the border in the French city of Bayonne. At the same time, he sent Marshal Murat with 50,000 troops to Madrid to restore order and, in reality, to tighten France's grip on the capital. But on 2nd of May 1808, the people of Madrid rose against Murat's soldiers. What followed, the 2 de Mayo uprising, would be immortalized by the painter Francisco Goya. In one famous scene, the Mamelukes of Napoleon's imperial guard are shown hacking their way through a crowd of enraged citizens in the Puerta del Sol. Around 100 French soldiers were killed. The response was swift and merciless. French troops shot down protesters in the streets and executed more than 100 prisoners by firing squad. Meanwhile, in Bayonne, Napoleon forced King Carlos to abdicate and calmly placed the crown of Spain on his brother's head. Joseph Bonaparte became King of Spain. That summer, Napoleon imposed a new, modernizing constitution on Spain, while Joseph made his formal entry into Madrid as its new monarch. But far from accepting reform under French guidance, Spaniards were outraged. To them, the invaders were not just arrogant foreigners trampling their national honor, they were godless revolutionaries, the same men who had once rejected the Pope and the Catholic Church. From pulpits across the countryside, priests warned their flocks that Napoleon was nothing less than the Antichrist. Revolt flared across the country. The regular Spanish army was joined by local militias and bands of partisans who ambushed French columns, cut couriers' throats, and murdered suspected collaborators. French garrisons answered with brutal reprisals. Villages were burned, prisoners shot, no mercy shown. The cycle of atrocity horrified Goya, inspiring his bleak series of prints known as The Disasters of War. At first, it seemed that the French would stamp out the rebellion with ease. French forces laid siege to Girona, Valencia, and Zaragoza, while in the north, Marshal Bessières routed Spain's army of Galicia at Medina del Rio Seco. But 8 days later, a disaster transformed the war. General Dupont, leading 3 French divisions, was withdrawing from Córdoba. His columns were slowed by wagons piled high with plunder. Near the town of Bailén, they found their path blocked by General Castaños's army of Andalusia. Surrounded in the summer heat, short of water and ammunition, Dupont's men were forced to surrender. 18,000 French soldiers fell into Spanish hands. About half would later die of starvation and neglect. Bailén was a humiliation, the first major French defeat since Napoleon had become emperor. Across Europe, France's enemies took heart. Napoleon, when he heard the news, was furious. The situation in Spain deteriorated rapidly. The Portuguese joined the uprising. Fierce Spanish resistance forced the French to abandon the sieges of Valencia, Girona, and Zaragoza. Joseph Bonaparte, the new king of Spain, was even compelled to flee his own capital. Britain now moved to support what Spaniards were beginning to call their War of Independence. The Royal Navy ferried weapons and supplies to Spanish ports. Then, on 1st August 1808, a small British army under Sir Arthur Wellesley landed in Portugal. Within weeks, Wellesley defeated a French force at Roliça, and 4 days later, smashed Junot's main army at Vimeiro. But just as victory seemed complete, his newly arrived superior, Sir Hugh Dalrymple, agreed to an extraordinarily generous convention. Under its terms, Junot and his entire army would be repatriated to France aboard British ships, taking with them their weapons and their loot. In Britain, the agreement was seen as a national disgrace. A public inquiry would clear Wellesley of blame. He would later become the Duke of Wellington. But Dalrymple never held command again. For Napoleon, it was now clear that the revolt in Spain could not be contained by marshals and minor armies. If he wanted order restored and his prestige repaired, he would have to go in person. He assembled 130,000 reinforcements, including many veteran units from the Grande Armée, and on 7th of November led a second invasion of Spain. Most Spanish troops were inexperienced, poorly equipped, badly led, and lacked any coherent overall strategy. They were no match for Napoleon's army, which surged across the River Ebro and dealt crushing blows to Spanish forces at Burgos and Tudela. At Tudela, Marshal Lannes's Third Corps avenged the defeat at Bailén by smashing Castaños's army and driving it off in 2 directions. Napoleon pressed on towards Madrid. North of the capital, 8,000 Spaniards tried to bar his way at the mountain pass of Somosierra. Impatient to break through, Napoleon ordered forward the Polish light horse of the Imperial Guard. In an attack of almost suicidal courage, the Polish horsemen charged straight up the road into the teeth of Spanish artillery, overran the gun positions, and opened the way through the pass. 4 days later, after Napoleon threatened to destroy the city, Madrid opened its gates. While Spanish armies were collapsing, another enemy had entered the theatre. A British force 20,000 strong, under Sir John Moore, had marched 300 miles from Lisbon to Salamanca, with a smaller detachment advancing from Coruña. Though many of Moore's soldiers were inexperienced, the British army was well trained, well organized, and well led, in sharp contrast to most Spanish formations. When Moore learned of the Spanish defeats, he did not immediately withdraw. Instead, he conceived a bold plan to strike at Marshal Soult's isolated Second Corps, threaten Napoleon's communications to Burgos and France, and thus force the emperor to divert his main army. At Sahagun on 21st of December, the British 15th Hussars rode through winter frost under cover of darkness. Then at dawn, launched a sudden charge that routed a French cavalry brigade in a single, devastating blow. But just as Moore prepared a full-scale attack on Soult, alarming news reached his headquarters. Napoleon was marching north from Madrid with his main army. While two French corps under Marshal Lannes began a second bloody siege of Zaragoza, Napoleon saw his chance to destroy Britain's only field army on the continent. He planned to trap Moore between his own forces and Soult's Second Corps. To do so, he drove the Grande Armée over the Guadarrama Pass in the midst of a blizzard, forcing his men through ice and snow at breakneck speed. Moore, facing odds of more than 2-1, quickly abandoned his offensive. He ordered a retreat towards the northwest coast, a desperate 250-mile march to the port of Coruña, where the Royal Navy might rescue his army. For both sides, the race to the sea was a brutal ordeal. Men slipped in mud, froze on mountain tracks, and broke under the strain. Among the British, discipline frayed. Stragglers looted villages and drank themselves senseless. Only the rearguard retained its cohesion, fighting a series of skillful delaying actions to hold back the French. Foremost among these troops were the men of the 95th Rifles, an elite light infantry regiment. They wore green uniforms for concealment and carried rifles, still rare weapons on Napoleonic battlefields. Unlike smoothbore muskets, rifles had spiral grooves inside the barrel that spun the bullet as it left the muzzle, greatly increasing accuracy, but making the weapon slower to load. At Cacabelos, during Moore's retreat, one rifleman, Tom Plunkett, is said to have shot a French general dead at a range of about 400 yards. Some claim even further. Thanks to the stubborn stand of the rearguard and the relentless pace of the retreat, the British kept just ahead of their pursuers. On New Year's Eve, Napoleon received grave news from Paris, rumours of plots, and definite signs that Austria was mobilizing for war once more. The emperor decided he could no longer remain in Spain. He returned to France with many of his best troops, leaving Marshal Soult and Second Corps to finish off the British. The pursuit continued. On 11th of January 1809, Moore's exhausted army finally reached Coruña. For the British, the port represented food, rest, and the hope of salvation. But on that first day, only a handful of transports lay in the harbour. Fortunately for Moore, the British had blown up bridges behind them, slowing Soult's advance. 3 days later, on 14th of January, the main naval convoy arrived, and Moore began embarking his cavalry and artillery. The very next day, Soult's army appeared on the heights south of Coruña. His men occupied the hills of Peñasquedo and emplaced their main battery of guns. Moore deployed roughly half his army in a defensive line about 2 miles south of the city, keeping 2 divisions in reserve to guard his right flank. Both sides had around 16,000 men. The French possessed 4 regiments of dragoons, but the rough, enclosed terrain, walls, hedges, olive groves, made cavalry charges difficult, and the British horse was already aboard ship. Soult's plan was to fall upon the British right, roll up their line, and pin them against the sea. Around 2 p.m., French artillery opened fire. Mermet's infantry division advanced, supported on the left by La Hussar's dragoons. Moore, unsure until the last moment whether Soult would actually attack, had already ordered Paget's division to embark. Now he hastily cancelled the order, sending Paget to reinforce the open flank, while Fraser's division moved to occupy the heights of Santa Margherita. French skirmishers pushed forward through walls and hedges, trading heavy fire with British light companies. Then the British counter-attacked. The 42nd Highlanders and 50th Foot charged into the village of Elvina and drove the French out. In confused, close-quarter fighting among houses and stone enclosures, they were soon forced back to their own lines. Sir John Moore was near the front throughout the action, watching the battle and encouraging officers and men. As he ordered the Guards Brigade forward to reinforce the line, a cannonball struck him in the shoulder, shattering his chest. He remained conscious, but the wound was clearly mortal. Moore was carried back towards Coruña. Soult committed Merlet's division to renew the attack on Elvina. Command of the British Army passed to Scottish General Sir John Hope. He sent 2 battalions to meet Merlet's advance, while Paget's division, led by the skirmishers of the 95th Rifles, arrived to bolster the threatened right. The ground was so broken that many French dragoons dismounted and fought on foot, but even so, they were slowly pushed back. Paget's advance threatened the flank of Mermet's troops around Elvina, forcing the French to withdraw there as well. On Soult's right, Delaborde's infantry seized a foothold in the village of Piedralonga, but were pinned down in fierce skirmishing. Around 6 p.m., as dusk fell, firing died away along the line. Word that the British line had held reached Moore shortly before he died in Coruña around 8 p.m. That night, British troops lit campfires and posted sentries along their positions, then quietly withdrew to the harbour and began embarking. At dawn, the French found the enemy trenches empty, but Soult's men were slow to exploit their opportunity. It was midday before they had 6 cannon in position overlooking the bay. By the time French guns opened fire, most of the British army was already at sea. A few transports ran aground in the haste of departure, and 2 were burned. But overall losses were light. A small Spanish garrison remained in Coruña, holding out just long enough to ensure the British fleet had escaped before surrendering the city. To this day, historians argue over how to judge Moore's retreat. Was it a needless disaster that failed Spain in its hour of need, or a daring escape that drew Napoleon and his best troops away from the heart of the peninsula, buying precious time for Britain's allies? What is certain is that Britain's only field army in Europe had been saved. It would return under Wellesley to fight again on Spanish soil. For Napoleon, the future looked far more ominous. He now faced the prospect of a long, grinding war on the Iberian Peninsula and renewed conflict with Austria, a 2-front struggle that would strain his empire as never before. In Spain, he had blundered. It would take years for the full scale of that mistake to become clear. Later, Napoleon himself would admit, "I embarked on this affair very badly, I confess. The immorality was too obvious. The injustice too glaring. The whole thing was very ugly." By the time the guns fell silent at Coruña, Sir John Moore was dead, but his army was saved. Britain's only field force in Europe had escaped and would one day return under a new commander, Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington. For Napoleon, the price was far higher. In Spain, he had unleashed a war he could not control and tied down tens of thousands of men in a conflict he later called very ugly, just as Austria prepared to rise again. The emperor who once seemed unstoppable was now committed to a long, grinding struggle on 2 fronts. In the next chapters of this story, that struggle will only get worse. If you'd like to see how the Peninsular War and the battles in Central Europe slowly tore Napoleon's empire apart, make sure you're subscribed, leave a like if you found this useful, and tell us in the comments, do you see Moore's retreat as a disaster or a brilliant escape?